Hello, I'm Ankita. Today I'm going to present my topic on public international law and international humanitarian law. And my concern topic is the case of recognition of present Taliban government in Afghanistan under international law theories and practices on recognition of government. So let's start with the introduction. In introduction, we can say no country has recognized the Taliban as Afghanistan's new government since it took power in August 2021. There has been much speculation about the preconditions and consequences of recognition. One important question is whether and how recognition or non-recognition may affect the counter-terrorism. Now let's talk about what is recognition. The term recognition means the formal acknowledgement of international personality of a newly born state by international community. According to Professor Oppenheim, in recognizing a state as a member of international community, the existing state declared that in their opinion the new state fulfills the conditions of statehood as required by international law. Theories of recognition. Now just come to the theories of recognition. There are two theories of recognition, constitutive theory and declaratory theory. The chief exponent of constitutive theory are Hegel, Ancelotti, Holland, Oppenheim, etc. According to constitutive theory of recognition, recognition alone creates statehood. According to declaratory theory, statehood or authority of a new government exists prior to recognition, and the chief exponent of the declaratory theory are Hall, Wagner, Bradley, Pete Corbett and Fisher. Now let's discuss kinds of recognition. There are two kinds of recognition: de facto recognition, de jure recognition. De facto recognition is provisional and temporary kind of recognition. It's a lesser kind of recognition. It's dependent on conditions which can be withdrawn easily, and it is given to the states which form through revolt, and full diplomatic relationship cannot be established with de facto recognition. De jure recognition, on the other hand, formal and definitive kind of recognition. It is fullest kind of recognition. It is final and cannot be withdrawn according to Article 6 of the Montevideo Convention 1933. And de jure recognition given to the states which is formed by peaceful and constitutional means. Full diplomatic relationship can be established with de jure recognition. Now let's talk about analysis of doctrines of recognition. There are four doctrines: Tober doctrine, Estrada doctrine, Beta Code doctrine, Stimson doctrine. First come to the Tober doctrine. The Tober doctrine, or the so-called doctrine of legitimacy, suggested that the governments that came into power by unconstitutional means should not be recognized as legitimate government. Now let's come to the Estrada doctrine, which is propounded by Mr. Estrada, Foreign Minister of Mexico. According to this doctrine, a government must be only recognized based on whether it is in de facto existence. Now come to the Beta Code doctrine. The doctrine expresses its disagreement on a state's recognition by military means. Now come to the Stimson doctrine. The doctrine was propounded by Mr. Stimson, Secretary of State of United States of America. According to this doctrine, any recognition granted to any states in the violation of international treaty, especially the Pact of Paris of 1928, will be deemed to be invalid. Now let's talk about background of Taliban government and its urge for recognition. When Taliban insurgency seized Afghanistan in 1996, they acted as de facto government until US invasion in 2001, but it lost its international and domestic support due to strict adherence to the interpretation of Islam. The Taliban imposes harsh punishments such as public execution, ban on television and Western music, prohibited women from attending school or working outside from the home, etc. In February 2020, US Taliban agreement signed in Doha, Qatar, the Taliban agreed to take unspecified action to prevent the other groups from using Afghan soil to threaten the United States and its allies in return for the full withdrawal of international force from Afghanistan by May 2021. The Taliban uses the term Islamic Emirates of Afghanistan to describe its government. On September 7, 2021, the Taliban announced a caretaker government to rule Afghanistan. Though the Taliban control and govern the Afghanistan at this point from a practical or de facto perspective, the international community has not yet recognized the Taliban as de jure or legitimate government. The United Nations permanent member sitting on credential committee of the United Nations General Assembly did not explicitly state that whether they will recognize Taliban as a government or not. But the Taliban's quest to have their Islamic Emirates of Afghanistan recognized internationally as the official government of Afghanistan has been fruitless since August 2021. In fact, United Nations draft statement on situation in Afghanistan reaffirmed that the Islamic Emirates of Afghanistan is not recognized at United Nations, and it also does not support for its restoration. Now talk about resolution of Security Council regarding the Taliban in Afghanistan. The United Nations Security Council resolution of 1267 strongly criticized the use of Afghan territory for sheltering and training of terrorists and planning of terrorist acts. Again, United Nations Security Council resolution of 1333 demanding that the Taliban comply with resolution of 1267 and in particular cease the provision of sanctuary and training for international terrorists and their organization. Again, United Nations Security Council resolution of 2513 reaffirming the importance of ensuring that the territory of Afghanistan should not be used by Al-Qaeda. And lastly, United Nations Security Council resolution of 2593 demanding that the Afghan territory should not be used to threaten, attack any country or to shelter or to train terrorists or plan or finance terrorist acts. Now come to the different principles of recognition. There is two principles, test of effectiveness and democratic legitimacy. What is test of effectiveness? It means to recognize a government. It means to recognize a government to determine whether it is effectively controls the state it claims to govern, like control over the territory, control over the majority of the population, a reasonable possibility of permanence. It is immaterial completely how a new government occupied the office, whether it could be through the civil war, it could be through revolution, it could be through military coup. As per this, Taliban would be the recognized government as it effectively controls the Afghanistan. Now let's come to the democratic legitimacy. Democratic legitimacy means recognition of a government depends on whether it is the legitimate representation of the people it claims to govern. So the government that captures the power through non-democratic means should not be recognized by the state. The Taliban regime, despite exercising effective control over Afghanistan, lacks democratic legitimacy and it failed to recognize as the legitimate representative of Afghanistan. Now talk about complexity in Afghanistan. The recognition would be easier if the change of the government within a state occurs with a political transfer of power through legal means, but the Taliban came by unconstitutional means in power, so the recognition will now depend on country's political consideration and geostrategic interests. So what are the options before the nation? The nation who refuse to recognize the Taliban de jure typically cite the theory of democratic legitimacy. Furthermore, if Afghan President Ashraf Ghani declares a government in exile after fleeing the nation during Taliban seizure of Kabul, it may recognize as the de jure government. As example, many countries recognize Yemen's A. Mansour Hadi's government in exile since 2015 as de jure government, not as de facto government, as rebellious separatists acquired power in Yemen through illegal means. In case of Nicolas Maduro government in Venezuela is not recognized by several countries due to the alleged lack of democratic legitimacy. But it would be consistent with international law if Russia and China formally recognize the Taliban regime due to its effective control of Afghanistan, because there is no legal binding obligation on countries to recognize regime based on democratic legitimacy. The legal consequences of the granting recognition to the Taliban government. The recognized state becomes entitled to sue in the courts of recognizing state. The courts of recognizing state give effect to the past as well as present legislation in regard to the property and diplomatic relation. The recognized state can claim certain immunity. The diplomatic envoys of recognized state can get a number of privileges and immunities in the recognizing state. Now discuss about legal challenges in recognizing Taliban. There is a lack of proper legal framework and divergent state practice. Most of the states feel they are within their right not to recognize the Taliban government because of its history. It is true that Taliban used Afghanistan soil during their previous regime of 1996 to 2001 to accommodate Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden for terrorism purpose. The United Nations Security Council resolution of 2513 reaffirmed the importance of ensuring that the territory of Afghanistan should not be used by Al-Qaeda. Moreover, the Taliban have been known for their non-observance of United Nations Security Council resolutions and international law in general. Now talk about recent statement from the international community regarding recognition of Taliban. US envoy Zalmay Khalilzad went to Doha to tell Taliban that if they come to the power through the force, they will not recognize the Taliban as they will not recognize Taliban internationally. The UN Secretary Antonio Guterres has even gone so far to state the recognition is the only the leverage that exists over a Taliban whilst pursuing for a united front among United Nations member states. And according to US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, a future Afghan government that upholds basic human rights and does not harbor terrorists is a government we can work with and recognize. French President Macron declared that France has opened talks with Taliban, emphasizing that this conduct does not imply recognition of groups as the country's legitimate leaders. The Indian government does not recognize Taliban government, the current administration in the country, but it has expressed a willingness to assist the Afghanistan whenever it is needed. Now, lastly, the conclusion. The recognition of government is a highly uncertain area of international law because it largely left to the state as to which governments they recognize and which they do not, and the reasons underlying that decision. It is too early to tell whether the Taliban's de facto control will ripen into the de jure control. Thank you.